I am very happy to announce that today's video has been sponsored by SEGA. So recently I was one of the lucky few selected to get early access to Atlus' newest JRPG metaphor ReFantazio, and since today is already October the 11th, the game has been released on all platforms and you can get it now by clicking the link in the description down below. People who have already tried out the demo can carry over the save data to the full version of the game, so you can get started right away. As someone who has spent the last couple of years producing challenge runs of various Persona and SMT games, needless to say, I was really curious to see which direction Atlus' newest game would take. I was already a fan of what I saw from the trailers, so I didn't watch any gameplay videos on purpose to go into this game completely fresh and open-minded. And initially, I really wanted to see this game as a separate entity and not compare it too much with the Shin Megami Tensei or Persona series, but that thought process was wiped rather early because you can clearly see the influence from those games implemented in Metaphor ReFantazio as well. Before we take a deeper look into the game though, I do want to point out that I'm not going to cover any specific bits from the story for the most part due to spoilers. There is going to be a little mention or two on stuff that has already been out there or featured in the demo, but otherwise I want to keep this a spoiler-free experience for you all. I also want to quickly put in some words about the performance of the game in general. While the console version seems to be running pretty smooth from what I have heard, some users on PC had performance issues, though there is a day one patch coming that should address this. I played the game with 100% rendering scale and ambient occlusion off, and the game was running pretty smooth for the most part, as you can see, even with my GPU running double duty, also encoding my local recordings during gameplay. Now back onto the actual game. The story takes place in the United Kingdom of Uchronia, which happens during medieval times and kinda acts as a mirror to the modern day world. Different tribes live in Uchronia and oh boy do they not shy away from telling you that they're not a big fan of you. The main character, who I named Makoto because of his resemblance to the Persona 3 protagonist, comes from the Elder tribe, a tribe which is often discriminated due to their inheritance of forbidden magic. This ranges from people whispering behind your back when you walk by them, to people and even shop owners straight up refusing to talk to you because of your ancestry. What I noticed pretty much immediately is that unlike the majority of SMT or Persona games, the protagonist is not silent in this game. While his voice lines are usually limited to the answers you choose during dialogue, and a couple of single lines here and there, I still prefer this variation over the silent treatment. Soul Hackers 2, for example, did a really good job with the protagonist Ringo, with her being voiced, adding a lot to her character and the dynamics to the entire party. The game is also not shy when it comes to killing people off. Within the first few minutes of the game there is already lots of bloodshed happening, which, to be honest, is kinda fitting of the environment you're put into. Anyways, back to the game. After the king got assassinated, a tournament is going to be held across the entire land to decide on his successor. This is decided by popularity and trust of the general public. To add to that, our protagonist is also on a quest to lift a curse placed on his childhood friend, the Crown Prince of Uchronia, whom the kingdom believes was assassinated as well. Accompanying our protagonist is a fairy called Gallica, who serves as some kind of navigator through the game. And before we look into the game's story too much, let's focus on the gameplay aspects a bit more. There are a total of 5 different difficulties, ranging from Storyteller, which is the easiest, to Regicide, which seemingly is the hardest. Unfortunately, you can select Regicide in the beginning, so I assume this is either tied to a New Game Plus file, or it doesn't unlock until you beat the game on hard, which is the difficulty I chose to play on. Similar to the last couple of Atlus games, you can see enemies on the map, so there is no more element of random encounters any longer. This time, there is a little bit more to that though. Not only are you able to see the enemies beforehand, you're able to stun them by getting several hits in and get a decisive advantage in combat, basically giving you a free turn. The downside to this is that the enemy can pretty do much the same. If you don't watch out, the enemy has a chance to get a hit in and then ambush your party, which, especially on higher difficulties, can be pretty lethal. The turn-based battle itself uses a press turn system like the majority of the Megami Tensei games. Weakness and critical hits only consume half of a press turn, allowing you to get additional actions in. But before we dive deeper into the more specific parts of the battle mechanics, we have to take a look at everything else that plays into it. Metaphor ReFantazio introduces a new mechanic called Archetypes, which party members can use once they awaken to their powers. Awakenings were already one of my favorite parts in Persona 5, and they certainly don't lack awesomeness here either. Some might consider ripping your own heart out a little bit of an overkill, but Persona 3 party members literally shoot themselves in their heads, and they're fine too. For the most part at least. Anyways, archetypes work like a job system where you can assign a specific archetype to a character, which changes the character's stats, skills, and elemental affinities. New archetypes need to be unlocked for each character specifically, which you can do in the Academia by talking to Moore. Moore is the keeper of the Academia and will aid the party in their quest by helping them unleash the full potential of their archetypes. And the most important thing in the Academia, you can pat the cat. This feature single-handedly already won me over. Great game, 10 out of 10, discussion is already over. Throughout the game, you get access to more and more archetypes. Those are usually unlocked by meeting new people and forging a bond with them, while new skills are learned by leveling up your archetypes in battle. Once you learned a couple of skills, you can also inherit skills from other archetypes onto the currently equipped ones. Unlocking new archetypes or upgrading them, as well as inheriting skills, take a certain amount of mag points, which is kind of a secondary currency that you gain from defeating enemies. And here is where the combination starts to be pretty much endless. Every game with a job system like this usually has some kind of combination that is pretty broken. I don't know if that is the case with Metaphor ReFantazio as well, but if there is one, I haven't found out the combination yet, unfortunately. Archetypes can also be upgraded once you max their level out. Like, for example, the Knight can become the Magic Knight and learn additional and stronger skills. Those upgrades often are also tied to the archetype's follower, meaning you need to level them up to a certain rank before you can do the upgrade to begin with. Archetypes also synergize with each other in combat with the new synthesis attacks. Depending on what kind of archetypes are present in your party setup, you can use specific synthesis attacks, which can have various effects ranging from big damage attacks to party-wide buffs and more. While those skills are pretty strong, they usually also consume a lot of MP from each party member, and even more importantly, take one press turn for each character that is involved, so keep that in mind when using those. There are lots of various archetypes you unlock throughout the story, and the game actively encourages you to try all of them out and start mixing them up. For example, there are various side quests where usage of certain archetypes is not advised, and the game will actively punish you for using those, since enemies will start raging and throw out Megidolas and other strong spells to pretty much insta-wipe your party. Other than that, you also have the classic equipment options where each party member can equip a weapon, armor, helmet or boots, and accessory depending on the currently assigned archetype. In dungeons, enemy and chests oftentimes contain certain types of equipment that needs to be appraised in a shop before you can equip them onto a character. There is also equipment that can be purified in churches. Unlike appraised equipment, you can use those from the get-go, but they don't unlock their full power until you purify them, where they gain bonuses like extra stats or resistances to ailments. A completely new feature that I'm kinda torn on is the Retry feature. By pressing the left analog stick during combat, you can start the battle over at any given point and return back to turn 1. While this is situationally useful if you get a real nasty or unlucky turn 1, I do kind of feel like this is cheating. Simply re-rolling the battle until you get a favorable turn 1 really does not seem like it is a good gameplay decision, so while I understand the reason for them to put it in, I am rather opposed to it. The biggest pro about this feature would probably be to re-roll the battle to prevent getting wiped and losing like half an hour of progress or something. Considering the game autosaves pretty regularly though, you won't really lose a lot of progress to begin with, so I'm not really too sure what to think of it. Luckily, you're not forced to use it, so eventually it's up to everybody's preference whether they find this useful or not. On the Overworld, you can use Gallica's scan ability to see the level of the enemies that are up ahead. This is pretty useful if you're not sure whether to Leroy Jenkins into the next room, or rather play it a bit more strategically, trying to get an extra advantage in battle. Enemies that are at least 3 levels below the protagonist are marked blue, and those enemies can be beaten on the Overworld without actually getting into an encounter. I assume this is to speed up the game a little bit, since battles against lower leveled enemies can start to drag pretty bad over time, but I kinda wish they would have done a little more with that. Having the option to fight enemies on the overworld or in turn-based combat regardless of their strength would have been pretty awesome, but I understand their focus on turn-based battles, and as somebody that usually prefers turn-based combat anyways, I certainly don't mind. Major dungeons also have Magla Hollow rooms where you can save and quick travel to other Magla Hollow rooms you have visited before. This is a feature you might recognize from other Atlus games. Remember when I said at the beginning that I want to view this game as a separate entity? Those things are the reason why this is not going to work, though this should not be taken as a complaint at all. As somebody that is a huge fan of the Persona and SMT franchise, I am very glad a lot of its useful mechanics made it over into this game as well. This obviously also helps getting into the core game mechanics much quicker than learning everything from scratch. Alright, I think we talked about the majority of battle mechanics for now, so let's focus on other aspects of the game. One of the most important things in a game for me is a solid OST, and Metaphor ReFantazio certainly delivers on that. The music in the game is composed by Shoji Meguro, who already delivered certified bangers with various SMT games, as well as Persona 3, 4 and 5. While the soundtrack certainly takes a different direction compared to other games, it is pretty fitting of the environment and overall very well done. There are a couple of parts during some themes that I'm not quite sure what to think of yet, but overall, the entire OST has very quickly grown on me, which certainly makes the game much more enjoyable. Similar to newer Persona games, Metaphor ReFantazio uses a calendar system where you get to spend your time freely by either doing storyline content, spending time ranking up your royal virtues, which is the game's name for social stats, hanging out with your followers, or doing side quests. For major storyline content, you usually have a deadline of a certain amount of days where you have to beat the dungeon, otherwise it is game over. And just looking at the first major dungeon, it becomes pretty clear to me that they are probably not intended to be completed within a single day. Dungeons are relatively big with a few mini bosses mixed in, and especially early on, you're bound to run out of MP really quickly. Like in other games, MP regeneration items are hardly accessible at this point of the game, and those that you can buy don't really heal for a lot, while also being pretty expensive for that part. Luckily, you can always easily retreat, regroup and upgrade your party, and then come back on a later day if needed. If only there was a way to somehow regain MP when you are in a dungeon. That would make it way grindier, but definitely doable to complete within a single day. Well, maybe later on you get better means for that. Anyways, let's talk about other time-consuming activities for a little. Raising your bonds with your followers usually unlocks new perks for the archetypes that is tied to that character, and if it's a party member's archetype, it can also give that party member some additional passive abilities. Unlike in other games though, your followers rank up automatically from what I can tell. The answers you give during dialogue have no influence on the actual ranks, but giving favorable answers gives the party additional mag points to be used for further improving your archetypes. Royal virtues are also important, as some side quests and followers won't be accessible until you rank up a certain virtue to a specific level. You can increase your virtues by spending time doing various things around towns, completing side quests, or on the Gauntlet Runner, which we will get into shortly. There are also the bounty hunter side quests, which are available in the recruitment centers. Those are usually shorter quests where you have to hunt down a specific enemy. This is something I really like, since it's a nice change of pace between the story elements of the game. With the deadlines existing, you often have quite a bit of downtime before getting back into combat, especially if you do the story dungeon portion early, and this is a good option to mix things up and keep the game fresh. Generally, each day has a daytime and nighttime activity that you can choose to do, though you are locked out of nighttime activities if you choose to go into a dungeon during daytime. Overall, the entire day-based system is very similar to the Persona series, so if you play through a couple of them, you should have no problem grasping everything surrounding it. Then there is also the Gauntlet Runner. The Gauntlet Runner is your vehicle used to travel through the world. This is also the part where the game starts to become a lot more colorful. While the first parts of the story are rather grayish and more dull, the landscape changes quite a bit once you start exploring the overworld. Depending on the location you want to go to, this can often take multiple days, so it's even more important to manage your time wisely. Do you want to do 2 side quests that only take a single day of travel, or rather the one side quest with higher rewards that needs 2 days of travel? The choice is yours, and it's definitely not an easy one at times, especially for people like me who are trying to optimize everything as good as somewhat possible. Luckily, there is also the teleport feature that lets you instantly travel to any big town you have already been to before. This cuts down on travel time quite a bit, especially when you want to rank up certain followers while being in a completely different town than they are. Generally though, I am pretty sure it is intended to do several playthroughs in order to get 100% of the game done. If there is a way to get everything done in a single playthrough, it is probably going to be really tight on time and super masochistic to do, so this sounds like my kind of fun. When you're traveling for several days, you get to spend your free time on the Gauntlet Runner by talking to your party members to increase your virtues or follower bonds, raise your max HP and MP, and also cook food. You can buy ingredients in towns and then cook with your party members to make meals for combat, which not only heal, but can also have various other effects. My personal favorites here are the critical meatballs, not just because of their effect, but I just find the name hilarious and I really wonder how critical meatballs might taste like. In the end, it all comes down to trying to optimize your time and get as much content crammed into your playthrough as possible. And yeah, that is it for the most part. I am about 20 hours into the game now, so unfortunately I haven't gotten as far into it as I would have liked before making this video, so there might be a few mechanics I have missed here, since they might not unlock until later on in the game. Nonetheless, I can already tell that it is a great fit for everybody that likes the Persona or SMT series. I certainly enjoyed this game quite a bit up until now already. A lot of really useful mechanics from other games will fit into this one, while also making sure that new additions give this game a fresh and distinct feel that somewhat separates it from the other franchises. The Archetypes alone give you so many different options that I can already see tons of potential for future challenge runs on the horizon, so stay tuned everybody, I think there will be more stuff coming in the future. If you want to check out the game as well, feel free to click the link down in the video description and get started right away. Metaphor ReFantazio is available on all modern platforms, so there is no reason not to get it. I'm looking forward to your opinion about the game once you get the chance to play it yourself. I also want to give a huge thanks again to SEGA for giving me the opportunity to test the game out before the official release and provide you with a video about it from my point of view. You might have noticed that I am a huge fan of those games in general, so this was a really cool experience for me, and I hope you all enjoyed my first deep dive into Metaphor ReFantazio as well. With that being said, I will now go back to work on my next challenge run video because seemingly I like the pain associated with those. So I hope you're all looking forward to that, and hopefully another opportunity like this one arises in the future. Until next time, take care.